Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. I've got Scott Fraser back with me. Scott, thanks for joining us again. You're always a plethora of insights in the emerging, changing centers of care, ASCs, private equity, and anything else you can cover.
Well, thanks, Joe. It's great to be back and really enjoy the time down here with the Mullings Group and Dragon Studios.
We got to spend time with each other in JP Morgan, and we went deeper and deeper into this sort of macro event that's occurring right now in medtech or in health tech in general, right? We've got these changing centers of care. We've got new players entering into this. We've got hospitals trying to figure out what they're going to do. The medtech companies trying to figure out, and then the labor issues and efficiencies there. So take us into 20,000 foot first, and then we can drill down from there.
Well, I'd say, one of the refreshing things being a stakeholder in this whole healthcare ecosystem was the fact that JP Morgan actually happened this year. And I think that was a clear signal by all the major healthcare executives as well as Wall Street that this pandemic is over. We feel comfortable being together. And as simple as that sounds, when it was canceled a year ago, then all of a sudden we had Omicron, after that. Right now, from a very, very high level standpoint, the number one stressor in this healthcare ecosystem is labor. And I think for all of our clients and all of your viewers, if you don't understand the wage inflation right now that's happening in healthcare, it's projected to be 7% annually for the foreseeable future. That is a pressure on all of us. It's not just on your hospital or your physician, owners of ASCs. It's a pressure on medtech. It's a pressure on pharma. The fact of the matter is there's not going to be a 7%, increase in our prices, for the foreseeable future. So how do we operate in this new paradigm with labor being that much more expensive? The other thing that I think you've touched on in a few of the previous broadcasts that you've done is healthcare being recession-proof. And, I've been doing this for almost 30 years like yourself, and, we do go through cycles. Is this cycle with more expensive cost of capital going to impact us? I would argue it's an opportunity for all of us. It's an opportunity for us to evolve. And again, from a macro standpoint, I think what's different about this projected downturn that we're in right now is the investment community is re-upping. They're doubling down. If you look at the fundraise that has happened in the last, 12 to 18 months, we're at 2021 levels. 2022 was a record year, although a lot of investors and big strategics talk about the downward pressures. Well, from a skiing analogy, we skied a 14,000 foot peak, 21. In 22, we skied maybe a 12.5, thousand peak in 22. So it's all a perspective. Right now. And I'm very bullish about the future right now. I think it's this evolution that we're going through and responding to it.
So let's go back to something you said earlier, and it's often disrespected and organizations sleep on this way too often, is labor, right? So if I can't get the right labor and the right skill set into my changing centers of care, my ASC, let's use the ASC model for today. Well, I can't do as many procedures. And I can't be open on Saturdays to accommodate those procedures, even though I'd love to. And then I can't sell as many medical devices into there, and I can't turn it as often. And my profits start to suffer there. So what do we need to do in the PE side? Is it technology that makes more efficiency? Is it less ASCs, bigger ASCs? Where is it?
All of the above. And I know that's a very general statement, but if you think about what's considered patient intake process in any medical facility, it is antiquated. And you compare it, I think so many of us in the med tech space, we're all frequent flyers. We all spend a tremendous amount of time on the road. If you think about how automated travel industry has gotten versus the patient intake process of scheduling, checking into an appointment, and not even, the sometimes half hour, 45 minute it takes to get back into a procedure room. That's on a good side. That is low hanging fruit right now. So the more you automate that, and you're seeing this, and I think all of us lived through this personally, when you go to the doctor's office, or go with a loved one to the doctor's office. That's low-hanging fruit that can be addressed with technology. The second side of things is, what do you do to lower site of service costs? And we've talked about this previously. The cost at a hospital for a basic ambulatory outpatient procedure sometimes is 3x times what it is in an ambulatory center. On a clinic level, the growth of telehealth, and it's been fascinating to see now from a political standpoint, is the CARES Act was put urgently together to address the COVID pandemic. Now it's on solid ground when you look at remote monitoring space. If you look at some of the things that are buried in this 600 plus page document that addressed health quality, digitization of pathology. I mean, there's so many different areas that are making healthcare delivery more efficient right now. And then you look at where, you follow the money. Where is the investment community focusing? And that's what I'm, so bullish about is, there's a lot of dollars still flowing into healthcare at the second highest level we've ever seen.
And the healthcare flow of funds. So let's look at the investors in those areas. Incredibly diligent, following the money. We've got an 18% GDP projected to be 20% in the next year or two. Aging population, and a large number of their already reimbursed procedures address that market in particular. You start to look at orthopedics. CMS has just absolutely opened up their sort of playbook on more procedures being reimbursed and can get pushed out to that. But how do we increase our efficiencies in there and the investment dollars into healthcare IT from a PE world? Is that an area of focus right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, where institutional money, private equity, venture capital are focused on is inefficiencies. And how can you take an inefficient delivery model and consolidate it and make it more efficient? And you make it more efficient with systems, you make it more efficient with expert, and C-level, talent that you're bringing in. And you're making it more efficient by having some consolidated mass to be able to negotiate with payers. So you are able to do more at-risk, patient populations, if you will, and do more chronic care management. All these buzzwords of value-based care that we hear, but what does that mean in terms of, if I am a local rep in a market and I'm in the cardiology space, the orthopedic space? Well, chronic care management, you got to follow it up. And, obesity. How are we addressing, this massive, massive patient population that is growing literally and figuratively every day, that down the road are going to need orthopedic implants, are going to have diabetes and have heart disease? Well, you got to follow that patient up further. And the insurance companies, unfortunately, have a short-term view of that patient population. It's the providers that have that connectivity. And that's where you see a lot of dollars flowing, is innovative ways to address, these chronic care diseases.
Do you see, as we think about ASCs, and we'll stay on that, do you see that also becoming a blend of at-home health as well? So you mentioned chronic disease. I think something like 40% of the population has at least one chronic disease, whether it's hypertension, whether it's orthopedic, whether it's mental health, all those. And a lot of that can be maintained at home, right? So if I'm a diabetic, most of my care is done at home, and the data I can pull off of my trends at home, obesity at home. Does the ASC then become an outpost, an aggregation of data, an aggregation of insights as to what's actually happening in your life over a 60-day sampling period, instead of a single blood test on a Tuesday morning, but your diet was shit for the week before, so your numbers are higher, you didn't fast as much as you should have? Wouldn't it be better to get a better sampling? Do you see money coming into that from data insights at home, a sampling of 60 days versus 1 day, and that will also change how we care?
Absolutely. And chronic care management, remote monitoring space has that connectivity that no provider, hospital, ambulatory center, outpatient lab will ever have, or diagnostic lab will ever have, because of the fact that they are getting multiple touch points a day on a patient and their conditions and, what symptoms that they're feeling. Our challenge, I think, right now is how do you aggregate that in a meaningful way that is actionable, and actionable to provide better healthcare. And I think the challenge is on the medtech community, the challenge is on the digital health community. There's a tremendous amount of aggregated data out there. It's like, how can you harness that to effectively change your clinical algorithms and, your course of action with certain disease populations?
The 18% GDP that you and I refer back to all the time, 80% of that goes into chronic care treatment. So we're talking about this acute point of care sometimes for a knee or a shoulder or a hip, or a ablative procedure. Well, yes, but the management of chronic care on a daily basis is what's becoming crippling. And to your point, I was at a conference recently, STTS, Eric Wilson's conference, and one of the clinicians was in front of me chatting, and he said, a calories never been cheaper to acquire in the history of man. And I listened to him, and he said, not only can you get 4,000 calories for a $5 Happy Meal,
yeah,
but when you used to have to get calories, you used to have to hunt it or fish it or raise it and then kill it and harvest it. So the calories right now are so inexpensive per calorie. We're talking about an investment community that's setting itself up to be successful until we leave this earth.
Yeah. Western diets aren't going anywhere. And you being in this space, and if you look at the spread of Western diets and the intake of processed foods, it's gone from the developed world to the less, undeveloped world. And that's not slowing down anytime soon. We've also, and I think the pandemic, we've all lived through this, we've also become, more sedentary lifestyle in terms of the fact that we're spending more time on screens, we're spending more time, in home offices versus commuting and walking and moving around. So we're going to be living with this for generations. I don't think any of us, have a crystal ball to say, all right, we're going to end this, the way we live. It's now trying to figure out how can you intervene as a provider with technology, with wearables, to allow patients to live longer and more healthier lifestyle versus, being in inpatient facilities for, nursing homes, what have you. And it's all of our challenges. The med tech and pharmaceutical communities share equally in this responsibility. It's not just developing a new drug compound or new device ablation technology. It's trying to understand what we can do to lower costs, have better outcomes than we've historically had, and also site of service change. Wearables are a great example of that. Not having to go into a clinic to, get your glucose monitored, not having to go into a clinic to, do a stress test. How can you do this at home, and how can you do it in different environments? And it's also, I think, so refreshing right now to see not just the investment communities dollars pouring into healthcare, it's the non-traditional strategics. And the non-traditional strategics, big tech, it's Amazon, it's big consumer, it's Walgreens, CVS, Walmart. And for them, in a lot of ways, healthcare is an experiment. Amazon can spend $8 billion on an experiment and learn something from it, have a takeaway, and then reshuffle and do it again. And we're seeing this now. The consumer-facing companies, Walgreens, CVS, are now providers. And what is that going to do down the road if I'm an orthopedic company, if I'm, a cardio-cath company, or I'm a diagnostic imaging company? It's going to have an impact. And I think that's where the disruption is really, we're going to see it with traditional med tech.
Is the disruption the large med tech companies not staying ahead of this shift? From my perspective, as I sit not so much with the emerging tech startups. It's actually the changing centers of care are fabulous for them because they can actually get new technology in around the bundling or the GPOs where the large strategics have locked them out of hospitals. I can get a stapler into a bariatric ASC, a new stapler that if not before, I could not introduce. So that's one area that ASCs are really helpful for the startups. But are the big strategics, from your perspective, are they paying enough attention? And are they designing their sales cycle? And if some are, point out, is it a Stryker that's doing it really well? Is it a J&J? Is it a Medtronic? Where does that sit from your perspective right now?
It's a great question. The large strategics, are some of the most successful, most admired companies in the world. And you look at their Fortune 100 ranking, but you also look at, their rankings on, most, favorable place to work. This is disruptive. And if I am a large strategic, ignoring this site of service shift, and doing business the way we did business pre-pandemic, it's going to have a catastrophic end. And if I look at the big strategics that are doing it well, and I love listening to earnings calls, Stryker, they are not a client of my firm, but really admire what they have done from a leadership standpoint. They start off earnings calls talking about their ambulatory center business. My former company, EndoChoice, was purchased back in 2016 by Boston Scientific. The reason being is we had a large ambulatory-based business. Boston Scientific had ignored the ambulatory space for many, many years, and it was a way for them to play catch-up. Now, ambulatory business, surgery center business is different. There are absolute pricing pressures, and I'd say there's this historical bias by big medtech executives that if you play in the ambulatory surgery space, you're giving away margin, and it's going to disrupt your pricing structure in the hospital environment. The other thing that I think is happening is the historical bias by all of our thought leaders. If I'm a KOL in orthopedics or in cardiology, or you name the subspecialty, I have a bias, a historical bias to say, the community guys that own ambulatory centers, they're just churning patients. They just bring patients in, and they're seeing 4 patients for every hour, and I'm seeing 1 patient an hour, and they're not doing quality care. Well, the metrics now that are coming out of ambulatory centers, I would argue, from a patient satisfaction as well as a clinical outcome standpoint, are better than the hospital in everyday routine elective cases. Now, if you have a more complex patient that has some comorbidity, absolutely they need to be in the hospital. But this is disrupting. This is a disruptive force, and at the top of the healthcare food chain are the payers. And CMS, the big blues, United Healthcare, what have you, are now putting coverage policies in place or non-coverage policies in place for hospital-based procedures. It's understanding that if I'm a large med tech, of how do I respond to that? And I think the big strategics still have a long way to go with understanding how to sell to a business entity, both your clinical algorithm of what your device does or your diagnostic technology does, but more importantly, what it does to your ROI of a center. And that's where I think there's a fundamental disconnect with so many med techs.
And this is where we were on device talks with Tom Salemi or late last week with some of the dynamics going on in the market right now. And some of these big strategics who have been trying to boil the ocean with their soft tissue robotic platforms makes sense, right? And making an ortho robot, which has got a high level of adoption and usability in an ASC, makes sense too, because those orthopedic docs, they just can knock those out, and it's a lot less of a complex system. But what we did talk about was where I think the large strategics are missing it is putting sensors onto all of their analog devices as much as possible, and then aggregating that data, because they're going to be forced to do this in the ASC eventually, more so in the hospital. And rather than give me a white paper on my profitability, if I use this device this many times and this pricing, it's a white paper. But I believe eventually, because you pointed it out, ASCs are going to have big B school MBAs who are going to be carving out the expenses. And definitely the device is going to be one of the top 5. Give me data that shows at the end of the quarter how your device, evidence-based, really did cut my costs. Because if you don't, the company that can give me that onboard sensor on something as simple as a Foley catheter, I want to look at my dashboard at the end of the month and see those devices actually save me money.
I would argue it's not just saving money. It's also, in some cases, activating a new revenue stream or activating a new patient population. The area right now that is hitting med tech and particularly imaging fast and furious is artificial intelligence, AI. If you think about radiology, any endoscopic imaging technology or pathology, having AI algorithms that are embedded into your scope systems, into your microscopes, or into your scanners that can flag a abnormality or something that is wrong with a patient at a much, much higher accuracy than the trained clinical eye is a cost. It is disruptive. It is a cost. But if you look at it in terms of its impact, it has a substantial impact to a downstream revenue standpoint.
On a procedure.
On a procedure. So a great example in the gastroenterology space, Medtronic introduced the first AI in imaging, and it was a long process with the FDA. It's a new category for the FDA. About 2 years ago, their platform it got FDA clearance, and now in clinical application, and where this platform has been adopted is in the ambulatory centers, because the ambulatory centers and the physician owners also own pathology in a lot of cases. So there is more cost to them doing the procedure in an ambulatory center, but they are recouping the revenue with the fact that they have higher diagnostic yields. And what does that mean to patient care? Well, that means to patient care is you're diagnosing more cancers. You're bringing, patients that maybe are at risk that otherwise would have been missed on a screening into a surveillance rate that maybe is a 3 or 5 year surveillance rate for colorectal cancer versus 10-year surveillance rate. And oh, by the way, the impact to their pathology ancillary business is very substantial. So it's justifying, you're spending more for the cost of a technology, but it has a justification from a patient outcome standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. And that's on the right side of healthcare. There are other technologies that, we've all seen it. You have a new catheter, you have a new, implant that costs 30, 50% more than the previous one and has a few more bells and whistles to it. But it's really not addressing those kind of two fundamental standpoints from an outcome standpoint, but also from a business standpoint.
A procedural unlock. And that's interesting, because then that comes back to the diagnostic market, and the sensor cost and the fidelity of signal coming off of sensors now just continues to accelerate in regards to even to a Moore's law perspective, right? But it's those unlocks. And so are these ASCs now going to have more capability in them? Are they going to have data scientists in them? Are they going to have, beside pharmacy and rehab, will they have a data analytics team within there, the better ones, or at least the large firms that have 100 ASCs across the country? Are you going to have data analysts and data scientists in that back end looking for unlocks?
Yeah, absolutely. The ambulatory surgery space has been somewhat like the wild, wild west for 30 plus years as these centers have been developed by entrepreneurial physicians that have first developed the centers. Remember, if you have a state-of-the-art ambulatory center with no physicians and no patients, it's worthless. But if you have a ambulatory center, maybe a 2-room ambulatory center that you have 4, 6, 8 physicians that have blocked time in, that is an incredibly profitable entity. What you're now seeing is the aggregation of these ambulatory centers. You have private equity or strategic investors coming in, spending billions of dollars to aggregate these entities and grow these entities. So you have networks of, if you're Surgery Partners, if you're USPI, if you're AmSurg, Covenant, what have you, United Healthcare, you might have 500 ambulatory centers. To aggregate that data, whether it's, on total joint replacement, whether it's on, screening colonoscopy, whether it's on ophthalmology, cataract surgery, what have you, it is incredibly compelling data. And the thing that I think is so fascinating from a med tech standpoint is historically we look at our top 20 customers, and it's the Kaisers, it's the UPMCs, it's these large health systems. When you understand who the owners are of these aggregators, those are your new largest customers. In almost every subspecialty right now, very few companies have sight to those entities, because they're different names, they're different, they spread across multiple states. And I think it's one of the challenges for med tech sometimes is to understand what the opportunity is and to quantify that opportunity so you can get more aggressive with pricing. You can get more aggressive, in some cases you develop specific products to those entities. And we've done this historically with larger health systems, with Kaiser and large health systems. It's now understanding how do we do it for this emerging customer base that's not emerging anymore. It's there. It's just no one has real sight to it.
So last two questions. The first one is there a difference between ASCs as we look at them in suburban areas versus rural areas, sort of like a tier 1 hospital and a tier 2 hospital on that side of the fence? Do you see that growth and that level of service on one that may be out in the middle of Iowa somewhere versus here in Palm Beach? And then what are the challenges that those have between them?
Underserved communities in our healthcare ecosystem, and understandably have gotten a lot of attention and a lot of resources. And this was needed. And the challenge that you have in more rural, underserved areas, and you can have urban areas that are underserved as well, is the fact that how do you make care more accessible? The fundamental basis of making care more accessible is having clinics, is having urgent care centers. I mean, if you think about how we normally flow into the healthcare system, if you're symptomatic, you're not going to go to your urologist, if you're having symptoms, with urinating. More than likely, if it gets severe enough, you're going to go into an urgent care center or into a clinic or into your primary care. And then from there, where does that referral go? And what's so interesting right now, and it's fascinating, is, all right, who owns these entities? Who owns urgent care centers? Who owns primary care? And that's your point of entry for any subspecialty in almost all cases. And the aggregators that are stepping into this space and doing it in masses are the Amazons, the CVSs, the Walgreens, and United Healthcare. Those are some of the largest aggregators. So what's going to be their significance for if I'm an orthopedic implant company, if I sell diagnostic scope towers, and where, do I need to start thinking about where are United Healthcare's referrals going? And what's fascinating about United Healthcare, and I use them a lot in lectures and speaking to clients, is they are vertical integration. They're the payer, they're the pharmacy, they have about 500 ambulatory centers now, and they also have a home healthcare company. What they don't have are hospitals. So it doesn't take too much to understand what their vested interest is. They're interested in more efficient delivery of healthcare, of healthcare services, because they're also paying the bill for it. So they're trying to drive patients into their vertical integration of different entities that we know as different names. And it's understanding, that side of where we're headed. And, they are a Fortune 100 company. And if you look at where they're spending dollars, it is not in hospital care.
And then finally, I think the number I saw the other day was 49% of the hospitals in the U.S. are going to be operating at a deficit this year. Yeah. And that additional pressure on patients moving outside of that big brick building in the middle of the city, that has been a model that's been around as long as our educational, elementary, middle school, and secondary, which is a whole nother conversation. But now we're pulling procedures out of there, appropriately so, giving better care, better outcomes. What does that mean for the future of hospitals?
It's a risk. I think it's a societal risk right now. And we've all understood more so, from COVID and the pandemic, the importance of hospitals for urgent care, for high acuity care. And it's on the level of national defense right now. So I think if you think about hospitals long term, I think you're going to see more federal funding flowing to hospitals, particularly in underserved areas, to stay solvent so they don't shut their doors. You're going to have scrutiny on private ownership of hospital entities, for-profit entities within hospitals. And you're going to see hospitals become more and more focused on not just being the high acuity, urgent, care level 1 trauma centers, but also vertically integrating. And it's fascinating, some of the hospital systems out there that have a major stake, not just in primary care provider networks, but also ambulatory centers. What they're responding to proactively is the payer that's telling them, we're not going to reimburse you for this basic diagnostic procedure in an HOPD setting, but we will reimburse you and will incentivize you to move that patient to an ASC or to an outpatient type-based OBL or outpatient infusion. I mean, you name, the type of diagnostic exam. Imaging is a great example as well. So, I'm not, my thesis in working with clients is not that hospitals don't matter. It's this evolution of what's happening in healthcare. It's like, how can you have the most efficient delivery of healthcare in the most appropriate setting?
Yeah. And homogenizing the patient population and the challenges there are different too. So the chronic care management, the acute care management, the emergency management, all that will matter. And I think that we've got to be really careful. It's an incredibly complex problem, and there's not going to be a simple solution. Yeah. Well, as usual, I learn a lot on these sit downs with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great being here, and I always enjoy the discussions. Look forward to many more.
Thanks. I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.